Hello, my friends. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for being with us. Once again, this is Spiritism, a closer look. You're watching us on Kardec Radio. I'm Luiz Lima, your host for tonight, broadcasting from Orlando, Florida. And tonight, we're going to take a closer look at false accusations. False accusations. That's something that we see all around, unfortunately, and it applies to several of the circumstances of our lives. For example, it could be something at the personal level, family situations, social environment, professional environment, but it could be something a little bit more serious, involving, for example, our legal system. Accusations at the level of legal systems, system of human justice. It's even more complicated. However, regardless of the circumstance, whatever it is always false accusation is always against the law of God because it's morally wrong. We should never do this. Unfortunately, it's something almost like standard in our society. Here's a clear example of false accusations in 2023, what we call fake news. Every fake news is a false accusation. So you're saying something that somebody did and that person didn't do it at all. So let's examine this morally wrong attitude. First of all, why do people perform false accusations? Well, what's the reason behind it? Well, there are several reasons. I'm going to mention a few here that I can think of. First of all, to gain or to maintain control of a situation already in course. So you have a situation and you need to maintain that situation, you need to control things, or you want to get control on things. And to do this, you can falsely accuse those who would interfere in you having control. So you tell something that can, take that person out of your way, if you will. That's one of them. Also, another possibility here is to comply with your own selfishness and pride, because it becomes a habit. It's a behavior that becomes a habit. So some people just do this because that's what they do, period. So they're just sustaining their selfishness, their pride. Another reason, to create the sensation or to create humiliation on those that they accuse of doing something. So those people are gonna supposedly, quotes please, pay for it, and they are eager to see the consequences of that person paying for it. So humiliation. To sustain, also another one, to sustain the idea that the accuser knows it all. I know everything. And then you ask me, who did this? And I don't know, but that's a shame because I know it all. So I have to make up somebody who's going to be guilty of something that I don't even know what it is. So I'll just say, this is the person who is guilty. Meaning just to sustain the idea that I still know it all. Here's another one, another reason, to escape the idea of being regarded as inferior. If you don't know who did this, you're not all that good because you don't know everything. So, to get away from or walk away from the idea of being regarded as an inferior being, which is equivalent to, and that would be another reason for false accusations, to establish superiority. Establish superiority. The minute that I accuse everybody of doing a bunch of things, I'm superior to all of those that I accused. Wow, that's very typical of spirits undergoing trials and expiations. Unfortunately, We see a lot of this in the planet. The example that I just gave you. How many fake news are there out there today? I'm not going to say a number of fake news, but if we could get a percent of how much of the published information is fake news, it's really high. And I gave you some reasons why. But I think the main one is to establish superiority. That's what is behind the whole thing, which ties into being selfish and prideful. Those are the worst vices that we can carry within. Okay, so those are, reasons why this could happen. What are the methods used by those who are going to accuse somebody else, falsely accuse somebody else of something? There are some methods. The first method, which is the worst of all, is they have to create a lie. The minute you accuse somebody of something they didn't do, that's a lie. So you have to create a lie. When you create a lie, you are co-creator. Everybody is. So you are generating from scratch, if you will, a whole new avenue of bad things, which is evil. So creating situations that will make it favorable for you to accuse somebody, that's evil. Creating lies. And that's the first thing. Second, the method. We're talking about the method. Second, sustain that lie, which is a whole different ballgame. Because you can create a lie and walk away from it, and it's not important, nothing is going to happen. But when you accuse somebody, now that you created the lie and accuse that somebody, you have to sustain the lie. You have to subdue others to sustain that lie. You have to establish control mechanisms to sustain that lie. And all of those things, having to sustain the lie, subdue others, create or establish control mechanisms, that uses a lot of our emotions to control, which is equivalent to it uses our vital fluid. It uses a lot of our vital fluid, which means in turn, we are making our lives shorter, physical lives shorter, with illnesses and diseases, a whole bunch of things. When we see the situation, false accusations, there are layers and degrees that this thing can be understood as. For example, let's say you suspect, you're not accusing, but you suspect that somebody did something and you accuse that person. Well, I mean, not necessarily that person is guilty of it. You just suspect that person is. So going from a suspect to accusation, that's something wrong, morally wrong. You should only be able to accuse when the facts are established and the circumstances are cleared out, and now we know what happened. So going from having a suspect, from falsely accusing, that's a problem. And as we know, whatever wrongdoing, it's going to have to be offset at a point in our lives, this life or next life. Here's another situation. So suspect making false accusations toward somebody who you simply suspect. That's one thing. Number two, affirm that somebody did something, but you didn't see. You didn't see. So you have no idea who did it, and you still accuse someone at your leisure. So if you didn't see, you cannot accuse. Cannot affirm anything. You can have your suspicions, but not accuse. That's, it's going against the law of God. But there's a third level, which is even worse, which is you accuse somebody of doing something, however, that something never happened. That's pretty bad because now you're creating a lie on of a fact that didn't happen. On top of that, you're accusing somebody of doing something that obviously they didn't do because it never happened. So you see, there are levels and degrees. And as we know, the worse we do, the more responsibility we have to bear. And we're going to have to offset. So creating facts to be able to create a guilty person who will favor you or your behavior or simply your to maintain your habits, that's a problem. Big problem. There are consequences. And usually, differently than a regular crime. When I say a regular crime is, for example, you steal somebody from somebody, you steal something from somebody. I mean, it's a process that you thought before, you put a strategy. How am I going to steal this thing? I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. So there's a thinking process behind it. However, the consequences are usually considered. You say, oh, if I get caught, this might happen, and so and so and so. So the consequences are usually pondered. They're usually considered into the whole equation. On false accusations, it's not. When you falsely accuse, or those who falsely accuse somebody of doing something, especially if the fact never took place, they have absolutely no regards for the consequences of their acts, which bears even more responsibility. It just gets worse. So you see, these consequences, they can be pretty bad. There's gonna be expiation for that wrongdoing. So they discharge their frustrations about life on others, and just by doing this, they will have to offset. One of the extreme cases is embedded, if you will, into bullying. Bullying is more or less like an extreme case of falsely accusing somebody because you start bullying out of the blue based on something that is completely made up, unfortunately. Another consequence of false accusation for those who falsely accuse, it creates an unhappy life for themselves, where they're going to experience diseases, illnesses, because the body is going to pay for it. The body's going to pay. What they do, if you think about the long run, what they do is by falsely accusing people, they attach a heavy shackle to their souls. They will have to face the consequences. In the beginning, I briefly mentioned when we do this or somebody does, and it has to do with our judicial system, which is really complicated. So there is something in our justice system called DNA exoneration. What is DNA exoneration? It's the fact that somebody was convicted, and sent to jail. Maybe they're even in death row, like many, many cases. And years later, DNA is becomes part of the process, and they prove that the DNA of the accused person, not accused, convicted at that point, does not match that person. So that person is going to walk out free. That's called DNA exoneration. in the United States, DNA exoneration in the United States started in 1989. From there on, more than 360 people were exonerated due to DNA evidence. However, about 70%, this is absurd, but it's the number. About 70% of these cases, the person who was convicted was falsely identified as the criminal. Now, how is that? By visual identification. What is that? We see a lot of these in Hollywood movies. A lot of these crime scenes in movies. We see that a lot. You're trying to find who is a criminal in a certain situation. So what you do is you take the person who we believe the investigators think it's the criminal. So that one person, you take that one person and a few more, six more, for example, who look similarly, have the same, general look as that one. So now I have seven people. You put them against a wall. You bring one of the witnesses looking through a mirror. The criminals, those seven people, do not see the victim or witness, but the witness sees them. And they got a question: which one of the seven do you think it was? And they will point to somebody, number two or number five, or whatever it is. That's visual identification. In 70% of the cases of DNA exoneration, 70%, way more than half, three quarters almost, the visual ID was done wrong, meaning I witnessed some crime, I'm taken to the police station, they show me seven people for me to tell them which of the seven is the one. And I accuse the wrong person, which is obviously going to change their life, sometimes forever. This is serious. One of these cases, two of these awful cases. First is Archie Williams in Alabama or Louisiana. I'm not sure. I think it's Louisiana. He spent 37 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. He didn't know anything. He had six, I'm going to say that again. He had six true alibis that proved black and white that he couldn't be at the scene of the crime at the time. Hard evidence that he wasn't the one. He was still sent to prison for only 37 years. And why? How come we got to this point? How low can you be in your moral behavior to do something like this? Apparently, the investigator at the time, that was in a small city in Louisiana, and small, especially at the time, 37 years ago. So these towns were really small. Then you have a sheriff and maybe one or two uh, police officers. Those are small cities. So apparently, the evidences pointed to somebody they couldn't put their hands on. And he was going to be ashamed, right? He was going to be ashamed if they were not able to solve a crime in a small city. You don't have too many people. It's not that you have 10 million people to screen and find a criminal. No. So because he was going to be ashamed, they elected one, just like that. And they took Archie Williams. He spent 37 years in prison because pride of a police officer spoke higher. The police officer went to the witness of the rape, not the witness, I'm sorry, the victim of the race for visual ID. She said, it's none of them. Then a police officer said, no, it's that one. Him, who didn't see anything. And she said, it's not. And he said, but we are going to make it be. Talk about moral. This is one of the cases. Here's another case. Also very, very famous here in the United States, Ronald Cotton. Ronald Cotton he was 21 years old when another 21-year-old woman was raped, and he was accused of being the one. So he told his dad, I wasn't the one, and so, he was going to school, and so anyway, he had alibis, but it didn't help him. So he was sent to prison and had a hard time in prison because he was accused of everything. Every single appeal he tried to do was denied. Every single one. His lawyer couldn't do anything. And then in prison, he decides to, because they got to do some sort of work internally. So he decided to work in the kitchen because it was something he, liked. And think about this, in a prison establishment, okay, the kitchen is the only place where every single prisoner, every single inmate goes through because they got to eat. So he knew absolutely everyone. He knew all the inmates in that prison. And he started to notice that with time in the first years, people would call him, his name was Ronald Cotton, and some of the inmates were calling him Bobby. And he goes like, but my name is not Bobby. I don't have anything. It's not my nickname. Never had this name attached to me. So he kind of, the years go by and he, let me investigate a little bit why they're calling me Bobby. And then he found out that there was a guy whose physical appearance was very, very, very similar to his. Very similar. Haircut, eyes, very similar. So, he kind of approached this guy. He was getting close to this guy because he wanted to know, ultimately, if that guy could have been the one. So, he starts talking to the guy, and the guy confessed to him or told him, yeah, I've been raping people and women. I've been raping women all over the place. So he said, this is the guy. I'm here paying for what he did. He's still in jail, but I'm not supposed to be here. So he tries to appeal, nothing happens until DNA evidence shows up. And DNA evidence, he saw that on TV when the O.J. Simpson case was taking place. So he saw that on TV and he said to his lawyer, I want to do it. I want to do DNA. And his lawyer said, if you do DNA and if it fails, that's it. You're in jail for life. And he said, I want to do it because it wasn't me. So they did DNA evidence and guess what? It wasn't him. So he spent 10 years in prison, and then he was, then DNA exoneration once again saves him. So how come was he into the prison? That's what I want to get. He was put into a visual ID session with the woman that was raped. The woman looks at the 7 guys and said, it's that one. The officers asked her, was him the one? Really? She said, yes. And he wasn't. So you see the level of frustration that Jennifer, had. She just wanted to get somebody guilty. And so she would, wash off that heavy weight she was carrying. So we'll just pick somebody and do it. Just to finish the story, when he was out 10 years later, when she knew that he was going to be out, she panicked because In her mind, she said, the first thing this guy is going to do is going to come after me and kill me. So when he went out, he asked the police to talk to her. He wanted to simply talk to her. So they arranged for, of course, there was a lot of police officers in the area, but they arranged to meet within a church, just the two of them with police officers all around, but outside. The woman, Jennifer, she created this absolutely incredible virtual dialogue of every situation that could happen. If he says this, I'm going to say this. If he says this, I'm going to say this. But if he says this, like a chess game that you see 50 rounds ahead. So she had all these answers, all of it. She was in panic. She was tense. So she goes into the church first. He goes after, sits right by her. And she is ready to speak. She has all the answers, everything coldly planned. He goes in, looks at her and says, I'm not really willing to talk to you. I just wanted to say one phrase. I forgive you. Now I'm going to go. And he wakes up to go out. That was all he wanted to do. The woman gets in a stress, in a release of stress that she was crying for hours. She couldn't face herself with the shame to having put a man 10 years in prison because, false accusation will, I shrug, and that's all. There's a price to pay. Falsely accusing people is evil. Look at the spirit scale, which I've spoken here so many times. It's at the bottom of the scale. Impure spirits, in which you're doing evil because you want to do evil. It's not even because you are reacting to evil that was done to you. No, you are creating evil from scratch. That's at the bottom of the scale. Jesus was falsely accused of blasphemy. He was falsely accused so many times by the entire Sanhedrin and many more people who supported the Sanhedrin. Now, those who falsely accuse, that's the important thing. I think that's the message that we need to take away from this. Those who falsely accuse, they are not making others to pay for that. They are making themselves paying for that in the future. They are the ones who are going to pay with suffering, with expiation that's going to come around. They have signed their own sentence by doing this. That's what evil is. You do evil, you sign your own sentence. They will fall prey to divine justice. You can be sure of that. It's in the codification. And that's why Jesus says, you do something like this, reconcile with your adversary before it's too late. Very wise words by the wisest men to ever walk into this planet. Thank you very much for participating with us tonight, speaking on false accusations. We're going to be here next Wednesday at 7 p.m. as always, Eastern Time. We'll see you then. Be well.